as I've been reading a lot about North Korea, as I've been listening to people talk about North Korea, and then over the past several days, as I've read what you've written about North Korea, and I've listened to you and other discussions speaking about North Korea, I've been reminded of something that I often tell my students, and that is that, a mark of an educated mind is the ability to recognize that sometimes contradictory things are true, that the world is a complicated place. And I've been reminded of that, of the complicatedness of the world as I've listened to you, because you've been speaking, or when you speak of North Korea, you're talking about people who, although they live in a very, very different culture, an outlook that's quite different from that of the United States, fundamentally, we're talking about human beings who in their basic desires and interests are just like us. Then, of course, on the other hand, there's the news of the day. I mean, early this morning, an article about news from North Korea, and the usual hostilities and the provocative language and things like that. Just a couple days ago, I was reading some of the things that you wrote about North Korea and very much appreciated the spirit of what you were saying about the importance of building relationships with North Koreans. And then next I went to some videos from an NGO, and we were hearing from defectors. And the defectors speak of a place that is, I mean, the way it comes across is this place is just an unremitting nightmare. And so they got to a place that they were willing to risk their lives to get out. And my understanding is there's something like 30,000 or so defectors now in South Korea, roughly. I think that's about the number. I guess I'm interested in what your response is to that. On the one hand, you've got what we hear from the defectors, and then there's your own experience where you're talking about relating with people. And how do you put that together in your own mind, or how would you try to explain that, or just what's your response to that from somebody looking in from the outside?
I think you've already phrased it really well, because it's all about the danger of a single story. And so when you only see one perspective or one paradigm, we can think that that's the only truth that exists. But as you already mentioned, the world is a complicated place. And so that doesn't mean that their stories aren't real. Their stories are very much real, but that is only one side of the coin. So when we think of North Korea, I think we only understand what we hear in the media. And that's, as we have been learning, I think in the United States, it depends. Do we watch Fox News, or do we watch CNN, or do we watch BBC? We'll have a different paradigm that we're fed, a different perspective that we see. And so that's what I would say as well. North Korea is, they are people just like you and me. And a lot of times we dehumanize them in the media. We dehumanize the way we think about them. It's not to discredit some of the terrible stories that you've heard, but there's a whole different side to the country as well. I think it's important to also understand most of the people who came out from North Korea, they came out during in the late 90s. From 94 to 98 was a severe famine in North Korea, as you probably know. And so there were some horrific stories that came out from there. Those, I'm not saying that those aren't true, but that's, more than 20 years ago now. The country has changed. It has developed. And so one thing we need to remember is there's many different sides, and it's very dangerous to just look at a single story. We have to have the whole picture and understand who North Korea is, not just from we have to see there's trauma, some of the trauma they've gone through, but we also have to understand their whole history and who they are as a people, who they are as a culture, and that, yes, you can make relationships with North Koreans because they are people just like you and me.
Yeah. I wanted to pick up on that. You used the word trauma, and I think I'm guessing that's primarily a reference to the Korean War and what happened during the war, or at least that's part of what I think you're probably referring to. And I want to talk about that. Just as a mental exercise, if you could put into your mind, a North Korean that you know pretty well, and you lived there for more than 11 years, is that right, if I have that?
About 11 years, yes.
So, I mean, this is a pretty rare experience for an American, not just to visit North Korea, but to actually live there for about 11 years.
Mm-hmm.
So if you could put into your mind a North Korean that you know pretty well, or that, maybe the North Korean you know best, and then imagine that North Korean hearing, say, a defector on a 5-minute video, giving a moving statement about, I decided I had to go, and all of the travails, and even some being arrested in China, returned to North Korea, and then they go again, right? How do you think that the North Korean you have in mind would respond hearing that, if that works for you?
Right. I think that's a very difficult question to ask because in the West, we think very individualistically. And so we expect North Koreans to respond in an individualistic manner. But the fact is that the Korean culture in general, but particularly the North Korean culture, is a highly collectivistic culture, probably one of the strongest group cultures in the world. And so they're not going to respond to you with an individualistic perspective. They're going to respond to you with what is acceptable for the group to say.
So even this, I think, even what you just said sort of illustrates the gulf, the cultural difference, right?
Yes. Yes.
Because what you just described is probably, at some basic level, kind of incomprehensible to a Canadian, to a New Zealander, to an American. You can maybe understand it abstractly, but until you've really lived with it, that's a difficult thing to understand. So then the person would not have expressed a personal opinion then. Obviously we don't know because this is just a thought exercise, but what do you suppose that person might say? So we could put off the table, there'd be some sort of individualistic expression. What do you suppose the response might be?
Well, honestly, I cannot conjure what somebody else is going to say, but my expectation would be that they would probably respond according to the main thought of the society and the culture. So everybody knows people who suffer in North Korea. That's pretty much a given because the system in itself is based on equality. It's a very communist socialist system. So everyone is supposed to be equal. There's not supposed to be a large gap between the rich and the poor. So everyone has a similar mindset, or they should have a similar mindset. So I would just expect them to give you pretty much the party line, the party response to that.
Yeah. Now, of course, as soon as I hear you say that, as an American, I think, and therefore that's fake. But what you're saying is, from the perspective of that person, since we're talking about a very different collectivist culture, to give the party line is not, do you understand what I'm saying? The U.S. point of view is to give the party line is to, to commit some act of fraud. But you're saying that would not be the case
Right. You have to understand, you have to put yourself in their shoes. And I know it's difficult because Americans have never been in their shoes. They don't know what it's like to live in that society. But imagine that from almost birth, if your parents are working, the state provides daycare. So it could be as early as 3 months. You are basically raised by the state. You're in their daycare system and you go to their education system. And that's all you've been taught. That's all that you know. The East in general, not just North Korea, but collectivist cultures, their goal is to be part of the group. It's not to stand out from the group. But in the West, we teach people to think for themselves, to stand apart. Don't just say what other people say what you say. you think. But in the East, I'm just generalizing this. It's a big generalization.
Sure. Yeah.
Whether it's in China or Korea or possibly even Japan, people are not going to give you individualistic thoughts as much as they will give you what the group is thinking, because that's the way society is. Your person, who you are as a person, only values depending on where you fit into society, into the group. So imagine that you grew up all your life being taught one thing. You've never been outside your country. And so that's reality to you. That's what you know. So when they give you the party line, that's what they believe, because that's reality to them.
And so in your memoir, you mentioned, the outpourings of mourning and crying following the death of Kim Jong-il. And, the question that arises, it's arisen in my own classes, is, to what extent is this for real? Is this just for the cameras, or, what's going on? And you suggest in your memoir, that you thought about that a bit, but if I remember it correctly, you sort of concluded, no, all of that was for real.
Well, I don't know if all of it is real. You have to ask every individual person their response. And of course, I don't know that answer.
Right. Yeah.
And what I can say is some of the people next to me that I knew personally were, when the current leader, when he first gave his public speech, I was there. And the person next to me, an older lady that I knew pretty well, she started crying, because that his voice is very similar to his grandfather's voice, and she personally knew his grandfather. And so that has a lot of personal sentiment. One thing people don't understand in the West is that the founding leader of North Korea is highly revered. He's almost like their savior, because in their mindset, he helped liberate them from a very difficult Japanese occupation, which is part of the trauma. It's not just the Korean War, it's the Japanese occupation. It's centuries now of trauma that the nation has gone through. And so some of that's real. People who have maybe personal experience, that would be real. Other people, it may be just something that they know they should do. They're going along with the society norm. So I can't speak for each individual, but I do know that there are individuals who did genuinely respond.
Yeah. So just listening to you talk, we haven't been going very long, but I am getting a sense of a, tell me if I'm overstating it, but of a pretty profoundly different way of approaching the world. And, and you say in what I've heard you say, and what I've read I've read, what you've written about North Korea is, I think you've used the expression, one of the reasons that the United States and North Korea can't get on track is because they're coming at things from such radically different points of view, right? Such radically different worldviews. Let me just read this clip here. I've got your memoir here, and you say there, that is, North Koreans, their understanding and interpretation of historical events and their world perspective is different from anything we had ever experienced. You're referring to your family, and I've heard you say that when you first arrived in North Korea to live there, that you arrived with the ideas that most Americans have. I think you even said you were maybe even at some points a little combative or something like that. But clearly you've undergone a kind of transition which has involved being able to see things from their point of view. So you've touched on it a bit, but I wonder if you could spell that out a little bit more when you say the North Koreans' understanding and interpretation of historical events and their world perspective is different from anything you had experienced before and anything that an average North American can understand. What are some of the elements of that?
Well, Wow, I think one thing that I realized living in North Korea was that we are all tainted by our own worldview. And so I don't know where the truth is, to be honest with you. The truth is probably somewhere in the middle or a little bit of this and that. But we grow up with our own worldview. And until we experience another culture and until we understand how they interpret the facts or they see the facts, then we understand there's other worldviews out there. Another thing about North Korea, I think, which is really, really critical in America, is that we are not even taught the facts in America. The Korean War is mostly known as the Forgotten War.
Yeah.
And there might be a reason for that. I don't know. But one thing that we started to discover living in North Korea was the incredible trauma that they experienced from the war. And I don't want to get into who started the war or what the whole situation was, but the fact is that the country was literally carpet bombed in the war. And so when we talk about, these are statistics that even you'll find in the United States, public statistics, with, average of 3 million Koreans died in the war. Now, only about 100,000 some were actually troops. That means that vastly over 2 million people were all women, children, civilians who were killed in the war. And a lot of that was due to the airstrikes on North Korea. Now, the North Korean population at the time was only 9 million. So to put that into comparison and to see, a large proportion of their people killed, basically. And these are not soldiers. These are not people on the battlefield. These are innocent women and children, grandmothers and grandfathers, without any say, just obliterated, basically. Now, you think whatever war is, in my opinion, war is evil regardless, on both sides. There's trauma on both sides. And so what happens is you have that stigma that continues to live on. And it's been only about 70 years since the Korean War, from 1950 to 1953. And so that generation is passing away, right? However, they passed those stories. They passed that trauma down to their children and to their grandchildren. And it's still very much alive, not only in North Korea, but in South Korea as well. There's more propaganda. There's more education about the trauma in North Korea. But even in South Korea, that trauma has been passed down the generations. And so when we're dealing with, Korean politics, or when we're dealing with politics with the United States, it's from that perspective. Korea, especially North Korea, is so traumatized, they don't want anything like that to ever happen again. So what would any country do? They would defend themselves. And, North Korea is a very small country, especially compared to superpowers like the United States and China and Russia. And all these countries have had a say and a participation in what's happened on the Korean Peninsula. The Korean people have pretty much been powerless for quite a long time. I don't know if you know this information, but the Russo-Japanese War, they were fighting over Korea. And then actually President Roosevelt received a peace prize, Nobel Peace Prize, for his negotiations in that. But what ended up happening was, because of the negotiations, Korea became annexed to Japan. And that's how the Japanese occupation began. So the United States was involved from the very beginning. And so the 50-some years of under Japanese occupation which was extremely traumatic. The United States had a part in that as well. And then after Korea was liberated at the end of World War II, Russia, or Soviet Union at the time, and the United States came in and divided the nation against the will of the Korean people. That was never Korea's desire. That was, the Soviet Union and the United States taking over this country. And so really that's where it all comes down to. And so because the country was divided, it set the stage for the Korean War.
Right.
And so, of course, the Koreans want to be a united nation. They had been a united nation for the most part on and off for thousands of years. And so they wanted to be one people. They are one people. But then as a result, because of Soviet Union and United States, then what happens? The Korean War breaks out. And as a result of the Korean War, there's even more trauma. So you have to think of what happens to victims. Victims become victimizers, yes? It's a vicious cycle. And so really what the Korean Peninsula needs is peace. And the United States taking this hard line, hard sanctions, give us everything or nothing, let down your nuclear weapons so that, we won't talk about peace until you give up your nuclear weapons. None of that's going to interpret to North Korea because North Korea is so traumatized, all they want to do is protect themselves. All they want to do is maintain their culture, their people. And so what small country would just give everything over to a large country with nothing in return? So that's the perspective they're coming from. I'm not speaking from my personal perspective. I'm trying to explain how they're feeling.
Well, okay. And so then as I'm listening to what you're saying, I'm processing it, and I have at least 5 different things in my mind right now, but let me go here. In light of what you just said, just going with accepting everything you just said for the sake of discussion, and I think what you just said, makes some sense. Then the sanctions, if I'm guessing, are seen as sort of the continuation, because I have the report here that you played an important role in writing, the report called "The Human Cost and Gendered Impact of Sanctions on North Korea."
Yeah.
And you I know, certain parts that I'm certain you contributed have to do with the shoe factory in the Northeast, with the medical facility in Pyongyang that I know you and your family were involved in. But what you write about in the report, and I'd love to hear you say more, is how these sanctions are hurting a lot of people, and they're hurting a lot of women, particularly. And you say in the report, we're not, focusing on the impact of sanctions on women to exclude others, but just as a matter of fact, they're having a tough impact on a lot of people, but particularly on women. So if I'm hearing what you're saying correctly, then from the North Korean perspective, the sanctions, let me put it this way. So I'm just a normal North Korean. I don't even live in Pyongyang. I'm in some smaller city. I've been reminded continuously of the Korean War. I've been reminded continuously that the United States and South Korea have these joint military drills, and that was, the occasion of today's news. And then I see that a life that's already hard has gotten significantly harder over the past few years. Mm-hmm. And we can objectively say that's because of the sanctions. Mm-hmm. From the point of view of that person, this sanctions-related suffering is the continuation of suffering that we can trace historically back to the early 1900s. Is that, am I reading too much into what you're saying? Is that kind of the...
No, I think you're trying to explain the North Korean position, and that would be their position. The government would then, they say the sanctions are due to the United States, which is true, right? The United States have put on sanctions with the intent of a non-volatile or non-harming way of pressuring the government to give up its nuclear weapons. But it actually backfires, because what happens is sanctions hurt the common people. They don't hurt the government per se. The government has ways of, figuring out how to survive, but the common people then are left powerless. And the reason why these sanctions hurt women so specifically is because the economic sanctions have targeted like textile factories and which was a big revenue for women because women are in the sewing industry. And so they have lost all of their jobs. The sanctions have also targeted, metal and basically anything entering the country, just about, unless you have a U.S. Treasury license and a U.S. Commerce license. Nothing from the United States can really get inside North Korea. As a result, a lot of the humanitarian aid has been drastically cut off. And even the United Nations itself has cut the budget for things like the UNDP and UNICEF, nonprofit organizations from the United Nations working in North Korea. So because of these budget cuts, they were not able to deliver emergency birthing kits. And so a lot of these women in rural areas, not in the main capital city, but in rural areas, they were not able to receive the birthing kits. And as a result of those birthing kits alone, I think it's in 2018, it's estimated about 4,000 people died. So that's why these sanctions are affecting the common people, particularly women, because it's targeted industries that the women work in, and it's targeted healthcare in many ways, because even the healthcare workers have to apply for special validation passports, even healthcare organizations, because we don't just deliver medicine. We have to deliver the equipment that goes with the medicine, and a lot of medical equipment has metal in it, and that's that's sanctioned. So we have to apply for a UN sanction. We have to apply for a U.S. Commerce license to ship it. We have to apply for a U.S. Treasury OFAC license to even do the work that we're doing. So it's very complicated.
Yeah, is the response? I mean, now I'm doing the mental exercise of speaking to somebody who has some influence when it comes to making decisions about these sanctions. And so the reason the sanctions are there is because there's the feeling that North Korea is a danger to Northeast Asia, to South Korea, to the United States now if missiles can hit the U.S., and that this is a danger that can't stand, and so the sanctions are there to convince the government to get rid of them. And I think this is okay. So we know that's the position. It sounds like the response to that would be is that okay, that that's a legitimate policy, or that's a reasonable policy, but it's counterproductive. Because what you're doing is you're feeding. This is the pitch to the United Nations person. Sorry, it's counterproductive because the sanctions, because they're hurting ordinary folks, it's actually feeding into the sentiment that's continuously being created that the world is against us and the world is out to get us. And then you've got this Juche philosophy, which is there anyway, right? Self-dependence. We've got, and I can imagine North Koreans saying, this is exactly why we have to be self-dependent, because or independent, because the world is against us. And so do you think that's right? That a pitch would be that these sanctions are, at least the way they're operating now, counterproductive, because they're helping the regime to keep the people of North Korea turned against us. Is that?
Oh, definitely. I think you've hit it right on the head, because it is feeding into North Korea's position that the whole world is against them, and these sanctions only prove that true. So yes, that would be the typical perspective of a common North Korean person. And on top of that, it's complicating the humanitarian crisis. And as United States or the United Nations, the last thing we want to see is us causing humanitarian crises. And that's exactly what's happening in North Korea.
Yeah. This is sounding tough. This is sounding difficult. As you were speaking, it had actually slipped out of my mind, President Roosevelt and the Russo-Japanese War of 1905. And it's interesting because as you were speaking a few minutes ago, I got insight into how bias does work, because when I read, as an American, when I read about the Japanese occupation of Korea and read about the brutality of it, I say, well, of course, that's what the Japanese did, right? They did that in Indochina, and then we had our own little pretty rough war with them too, and yeah, of course. But then when the conversation turns to the Korean War, and complicated war, a lot of stuff happened, but let's spend a few minutes talking about specifically the obliteration of Pyongyang. And, I think you say somewhere in every city in North Korea was basically leveled. Talk about that. Then, there's a natural tendency for me to say, well, you know what I'm saying? It's a lot easier to go along with the statement about the impact of Japan's occupation than it is to have a non-defensive discussion about the Korean War and trying to see it from different perspectives. So even as you were talking, I felt like I got insight into, how bias works.
South Korea is very brand new in the way that they're thinking, and they have a lot of influence from the West, from the United States. Right. North Korea was influenced by, of course, the Soviet Union, and has influence from China, but they want to maintain that uniqueness that we are our own people. So they've even gotten rid of a lot of foreign words in their language, whereas South Korea has adopted a lot of foreign words into their language. And so that's just the difference between the mentality of the two nations. But I would say that the Korean nation as a whole has a very strong identity.
The hope is that the Korean Peninsula will be united. And I've heard you say that you think that this hope is actually deeper in the north than it is in the south, that the Korean Peninsula will be united. Again, it's just a thought experiment. Let's say that this happened. I mean, we've seen something, maybe not comparable, but at least something within the ballpark. I mean, the rapid unraveling of the East Bloc back in 1989, and now all of a sudden West and East Germany have to figure out, how to get along. I think we're talking about something different here, but suppose something like that did happen, like sort of unexpectedly, now, there is some sort of unification. Do you think that would go well? I mean, have the cultures diverged so much that would be pretty rough? We can't know, but what's your sense of that?
Right. When you look at Germany, I think Germany is still working through some of those issues with East and West Germany. They've done a wonderful job at unification. And, a lot of people look at Germany as a model for Korea. But the problem with that is that Germany was never at war with itself. They never had a civil war. And from the very beginning, they were committed to unifying. Well, as you stated, in the North, the desire to unify is still very strong. It's still very much a part of their mainstream education. You see it everywhere in their statues, in their slogans. But in the South, people are comfortable now. They have a pretty good lifestyle in the South. People worry about whether if they unify, what would happen to the economy, because the Southern economy would have to carry the brunt of the North economy. And so there's a lot of issues like that North and South Korea are working through. But one of the main obstacles, there's two main obstacles. One is the Korean War, because they both have felt victimized. In fact, they were both victims of the war. And so there's a lot of difficult sentiment related to that. So a lot of unforgiveness, a lot of bitterness, a lot of hatred that still exists. In South Korea, that feeling is mostly targeted towards the North. Whereas in North Korea, that negative sentiment has been mostly targeted towards the United States. So actually, North Korea does not feel those bitter feelings about South Korea. They want to unite with South Korea. But North Korea doesn't understand that the South Koreans feel victimized by the North. And so there's a lot of reconciliation that needs to happen between North and South Korea. The second thing that you mentioned was the culture. The culture has diverged over the past 70 years. If you can imagine growing up, in a socialist society versus a capitalistic society, and just the different mindset, the different worldview, and as I mentioned, the language has diverged as well. The language was already somewhat different. There were always dialects in Korea, a different dialect in the north and different dialects in the south. But now it's diverged even more because of their worldview, their communist jargon, the way that South Korea has adopted a lot of foreign words into their language. And so there's a lot of divergence there. So if Korea was ever to unify, I think my personal hope would be that it would be a slow process of reconciliation, and really working through each of these little tiny issues to the large issues, because it's not going to be a simple process. It's very complicated. And the last thing we want to see, which I think this is one way that my personal perspective is different from many people in the West, is, and I used to think this too. I used to think, oh, if only, North Korea collapsed, that would be the perfect scenario. But I think that is one of the worst scenarios, because that means, a very chaotic situation for the common North Korean people. And it also means chaos for South Korea. And instead of them being able to come to terms with one another and really unify on a strong platform, a strong foundation, that sets the stage for even more conflict. Yeah. So I really hope that we can start working towards this peace process on the Korean Peninsula. Unfortunately, the United States is essential for that, because as you know, the Korean War has never ended. We only have, a cease of arms agreement. So in order for us to even move on, to even want to start unification on the Korean Peninsula, we first have to declare an end to the Korean War. And I know there's legislation in Congress proposing this, and it's ridiculous. It's been over 70 years of war. It's the longest standing conflict in American history. So that's the first step. We have to end the war. And once we're able to end the war, and only the United States has the power to do so, because South Korea did not have their own military at the time. So the US, representing the UN nations, military forces, the US has to declare an end to the war. And then we can start moving towards this process, a slow process of working out all these details, all these differences, and hopefully eventually coming to a place where there's reconciliation on the Korean Peninsula.
You say that in North Korea, there's, I guess, part of the educational system, that part of that is expressing the hope that the peninsula can be unified. Is that predicated on the understanding that the South becomes a socialist country? Is that the idea? Or do you think there is an openness to a one country, two systems kind of thing? Or, how is that taught, that eventually, Juche will win and become the dominant force throughout the peninsula? Or how is that approached?
Right. I was actually surprised, because I asked the same, I had the same questions you have when we were in North Korea. And I actually asked our counterparts in North Korea these questions. And apparently the founding leader of North Korea in the 90s, I believe, before he passed away, he actually declared that the two countries should coexist with separate systems.
So two systems, one country, two systems.
Yes. Because their desire is to unify as a people, as not necessarily a political nation. I mean, I think they want to go towards that, but that's not going to be a simple process. And so the last proposal that I understood the North Korean government working on was two systems, two system nation.
Two systems. And that was Kim Jong-il who said that?
I believe it was Kim Il-sung, but I could be wrong.
Right.
This was a few years ago, but yes, I believe it was the founding leader who proposed this right before he died.
Which would make it even more significant, right?
Which would be all his, all of his ideologies are basically forever written in the stone of North Korea right now. When they say he lives on forever, they don't actually believe that he's physically living. What they're saying is his ideology, his philosophy, his foundation for the nation will continue to live on forever is what they mean. So if he said it, then it's pretty much the truth. If his son said it, then it's still a very strong statement, but not as powerful as if the founding leader said it.
Yeah. So just a few more questions here, but if either the founding leader or his son said that, I mean, I'm not a diplomat, I don't know anything about that stuff, but that seems to me like an obvious diplomatic opening. I mean, you just a minute ago, you were saying, we need to, get the end of the war declared. And then this is, of course, this is related to the Cold War. This is sort of a survivor from the Cold War. But if the founding leader or the founding leader's son said, look, the objective is not for a communist South, right? The objective is, or an objective is, two systems, one country. That seems to me like a pretty, again, I don't know anything about diplomacy, but that seems to me like a pretty obvious diplomatic opening. Do you agree?
You would think, yes, you would think it would be an opening. Unfortunately, this comes to the matter of trust. And so the United States doesn't trust North Korea. North Korea definitely doesn't trust the United States. There's been broken promises on both sides multiple times. South Korea doesn't trust North Korea. They're still very much traumatized from the Korean War. And so whether North Korea declares this to be true or not, if this is really their current idea that they're working from, the problem is that South Korea and the United States don't trust that. So that is why it is so important to engage in relationships. We can't build trust if we're not actually trying to learn of one another, to know who each other are, and to make that first step. And the saying that keep your friends close but keep your enemies closer, it's a pretty wise saying, because unless we understand who we're working with, how do we know what they want? How do we know how to talk to them? How do we know if we can trust them or not? And so these are issues that are really deeply embedded in this, not just between North and South Korea, but also with the United States and Korea as well.
You mentioned a relationship, and that's something that's emphasized in your memoir. It's emphasized in other things you write. And, it's demonstrated in your own experience. Let me say, I think I may not have the specifics right, but your husband got a PhD there in North Korea. And then if I remember correctly, when the degree was going to be conferred, then the question was, could you be at the ceremony? And the assumption was probably not, but it turns out that you could be there. And my understanding is you're the very first, certainly the very first American ever to be in that kind of ceremony in the history of North Korea. Is that right?
Yes, very close. My husband's also a U.S. citizen.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, he's a U.S. citizen. Yeah.
But I think for Koreans, if you're ethnically Korean, it's very different than if you are non-ethnic Korean. My husband is an ethnic Korean, and so for him to get invited, the ceremony went, and to explain it a little bit better, North Korea does not issue PhDs or doctoral degrees from an academic institution. It's actually issued from the government itself. So you can study up through master's level at an academic institution, but when it comes to PhDs, those are considered like high honors. almost like receiving a medal. In fact, my husband did receive a medal when he received his PhD as well. So it's a highly honoring ceremony, and it takes place in their Congress Hall. And so in order for myself, his wife, to be able to attend, we had to petition the government, because I'm not ethnically Korean. I'm a Caucasian American. And so they did grant me access. And I believe, I may be mistaken, but I do believe that I probably am the first non-ethnic Korean American to be in Congress Hall.
But there's another story you tell that I found pretty powerful. And if I have the details right, you were living on a compound, pretty isolated, heavy security for about 4 years, couldn't take it anymore, wanted to go to the embassy compound and, be able to interact more. Your request for that to happen was denied. But then if I have it right, your, I don't know if the right word is, minder, guide, driver, someone intervened on your behalf and wrote a letter, which then convinced folks to let you make this move, which then made some pretty extraordinary work you've been involved in happen. Is that right?
That is correct. Our North Korean counterpart, he felt terrible. We had been living for 4 years in almost complete isolation. We had no neighbors. We, in North Korea, the general public doesn't have a lot of freedom, but as a foreigner, we had even less freedom living in North Korea. And so that's one thing I don't miss about living there. However, I do miss the people, because we did build really strong relationships. And one of those relationships was with our North Korean counterpart. And when he heard that our application was denied, and this was something we had been working on for 4 years, it's not something, we never intended to live on that compound long term, but that's what was happening. And when it was denied, it came to the point where we were almost at our breaking point, and we said, okay, we need to leave. We need to take a break. We can't live in isolation like this anymore. And he then wrote on our behalf without us knowing about it. It was, he did something behind us, not even us being involved at all, petitioned. And what he wrote was actually a story of me sharing with him my heart for reconciliation on the Korean Peninsula, and my passion to see these two countries come to a place of being able to forgive one another and to be united and to receive healing and hope. And because of that story, they actually reversed their decision, and we were able to become the first American family to ever live on the embassy compound in Pyongyang, North Korea, because as you know, we don't have any diplomatic relations with North Korea. And so we actually had no right to request that. But because of that relationship, because of our heart of wanting to see a breakthrough on the Korean Peninsula, they made an exception just for our family.